Good evening and welcome to this week's session, Dealing with Life and All of Life's Obstacles. We've heard stories over the past 2 weeks from members. Sister Linda Stansberry has talked about her journey with cancer. Sister Michelle Williams has shared her journey and her life challenges and what it took for her to listen to God's voice and not to quit. Tonight, as we go further, we'll hear from Deaconess Clara Connor, who will share about her story and what it took for her not to quit.
My name is Clara Connor. There are situations in my life that I've had to grow through that taught me not to quit. It was Father's Day of 2002, and it started out like any ordinary Father's Day. Kevin, Jessica, and I celebrated Father's Day at home before going to church. We shared our gifts with him. We spent some family time together. And then he went off to church because he was on the communications ministry. He was a cameraman. And Jessica and I followed behind him to come to the service. Following church, we planned to spend time with his family for Father's Day cookout. So when Jessica and I finished church, we went to his mom and dad's house that was near our church, and we waited for him, but he never came. I called him on the phone. He didn't answer. Called several times, and he didn't answer. And so I went home thinking, what is going on? This is not like him to answer, not to answer. On the way home, going up 695, I saw an accident. In fact, the traffic was backed up on the other side, 695 going south. And the week before, we had a death in the family. Kevin's aunt passed away. And he was actually returning chairs that we had borrowed in order to be able to accommodate the entire family. So as I saw this truck that he had borrowed, or that looked like the truck he had borrowed, I said to my daughter, "Is that the truck that Daddy borrowed?" And she said, "No, it doesn't look like that one." But it was in my mind, and there was something in my spirit that just would not allow me to rest. We went home. It was so in my spirit that I called the hospital to see if any report of an accident had occurred and he had been brought in. I called the police department to see if anything had happened, and that was not the case. I was so moved that Jessica and I got back in the car. We went down to 695 where the accident was. I made an attempt to walk up on I parked the car, made an attempt to walk up on the ramp after having her stay in the car, but they would not let me up. The police wouldn't let me up. The accident was still there. The traffic was still bad. I went home, and as soon as I got home, a knock came on the door, and it was the state trooper sharing with me that indeed it was Kevin who was in the accident and that he had passed away. At that point, he asked, "Is there anybody that you want here with you?" And my neighbor came over to sit with us until family members arrived, because it was just an unbelievable situation. How could this be? How could this happen? But in my spirit, I knew something had happened and something was wrong. Even prior to going to church, serving on new members ministry that morning, I felt something in my spirit, and my team prayed for me. So of course it was confirmed, and the family arrived, and we all just couldn't believe that it happened. I think that's one of the most difficult things, is just the unbelief that something like this has happened and to be able to accept it. So, of course, I believed that he would come walking through the door and, "Hi, honey," and that didn't happen. But as the reality of it set in, and I just couldn't believe it, I remember saying to my mom, I can't believe he's gone. I just can't believe it. And it was following the services, and she said, yes, you can believe it. You saw them bury him. You can believe it. You just can't accept it yet. And I had to realize that that's where I was. I was at a point of not being able to accept what had happened. The thing that, as days went on and I had to live through it, in order to get through it, of course, I felt like one of my limbs had been taken away, like my arm had been detached from my body because he was a part of me. And nonetheless, I had to go on because I had an 11-year-old who was watching me. She was watching what I was going to do. She was watching me cry. She was watching me continue with life. And I could not allow not only her father to die, I could not die and still be on earth while she was here to leave her alone. So I was determined in my spirit that I had to keep going because of her. Some things that I feel like kept me going was, this occurred in June of 2002, but in May of 2002, I graduated from 3 years of discipleship. And I feel like that walk through discipleship year after year after year is what got me through that experience. I learned to trust God. I learned to rely on Him. I learned to trust Him even when I didn't know He was near, even when I couldn't trace Him, even when I didn't feel like I could hear Him or had answers. I learned to trust in Him. And when that happened, I had to trust on Him even more. I remember getting up every morning, and I didn't want Jessica to see me crying all the time. So I would get up around 5 o'clock in the morning. I would write in my journal, a journal that I developed while going through a grief class that was held right at New Psalmist. And I would write letters and notes to Kevin and say the things that I didn't get a chance to say before he passed away. And that helped me say the things that I wanted to say, to get them outside of myself so they weren't ruminating in my mind. But I wanted to share with him what was going on. I shared stories about what was going on with Jessica and things such as that. The journal that I developed, because it was Father's Day, I had purchased him a card. And I took pieces of the card and cut them out and put pictures of him on it and the contents of the card, and made the face of the journal and all the things that I thought about him. I've since sealed this journal because it's a part of my life that did not go away, but it's a private part that's for him and I. And so I've somewhat closed the journal for us. So journaling was one of the things that got me through. Certainly my faith was a part that got me through, but also my family and my friends. My family and friends were instrumental parts of getting through this process, of growing through this process that made it livable. There were moments when, of course, that I cried, but there were moments when there was laughter because I was with them. We were doing things to help move the sadness and the pain away. My church family was very instrumental in the process. I remember Pastor saying to me, Clara, handle the grief or it will handle you. That is what prompted me to take the time every morning to get up, do my crying, write in my journal, and process, wash my face, and prepare myself to go to work that morning. And that helped me get through. As time moved along, there was a dream that Kevin and I had. I was already a master's prepared psychiatric nurse. And I was working for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene as a consultant. But I wanted to go back. I missed the patient population and I wanted to go back to school. So we decided that that year I was going to go back to school and retool some things. However, that certainly stopped the process. That stopped the process, and I wasn't able to get back to school until about 3 years later. But it happened because I kept the dream in the forefront of my mind to become, to show Jessica that we will get through this. We will smile again. We will have a life. Daddy did not expect us to go because he did. And God has kept us here for a reason. And we have to be able to show ourselves and to show others that we can get through this experience. When I went back to school, I had a very interesting process. As I continued my psychiatric nursing postmaster's degree, I took a clinical experience at Kernan Hospital. And at Kernan Hospital, I got to experience things like individuals that had devastating accidents, rollovers, young people that wound up paralyzed, individuals with traumatic brain injuries, people that had devastating strokes, and just all the kinds of things in life that we go through that we have to keep fighting through. And that gave me the strength that I needed 3 years later to actually open up the autopsy and look at Kevin's cause of death, because before then I wasn't able to see what had happened. And God allowed me to work with individuals that had spinal cord injuries, and I was able to see the life that Kevin would have lived had he lived. And individuals were, and he would have been paralyzed from the neck down. And Kevin was so alive that I think that would have been more devastating than not to live. And so I feel like God graced him, God graced us to allow him to cross over, because he knew God, he knew who he was, and I believed he welcomed him in. And so as I continued to go on my journey at Kernan and just see more and more of people, I was able to share parts of my story. I ran groups with individuals, and I was able to hear their story, but also share part of my story in order to allow them to see we can overcome some things, and share with the family members of those who were going through. And even though the injuries were there was still an opportunity to live. And so, you know, as I kind of share all that I went through, all that we went through, and I have to say it was my faith that was the thing that got me through the most. I just believed God wouldn't leave me that way. He wouldn't leave me crying. He wouldn't leave me sad. He wouldn't allow me to just be in that place for the rest of my life. I remember meeting with some other ladies who were widows in the church. And during that meeting, I was so filled up with tears that I could hardly speak about what was going on. But they were not crying anymore, and they had smiles on their faces, and they were encouraging me. And I believe God had no respect of person, and if he did it for them, that he would do it for me. I couldn't get angry with God because he made the decision that he allowed it to be. I won't say he caused it to be, he allowed it to be. and he allowed him to pass. But this year is the 20th year anniversary of his death. And in that, I can just say God has brought me, Jessica, my family, who also hurt. He brought us all the way through this experience. And I'm just grateful to be able to share the story because it may help someone else who is in the process of being there, like the other widows helped me. They may not be able to see the end of the road, but I'm a picture of the end of the road, that it can happen, that you will be able to actualize your dream, and that God will bless you in the process. I finished school I finished my program in 2008. I became a nurse practitioner at that point, and I was able to not only do therapy, but I was able to prescribe as well. And I believe God has placed me here to encourage, to help others, and to be that possibility that others can see in me that you can overcome. And I just thank him for the tools that he gave me, the tools to, when Satan is whispering in your ear, you won't make it, to tell him, get behind me, Satan, get under my feet. I will. I can do this. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That he gives me other scriptures, fear not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my right hand of righteousness. And just the word that he's placed in me that becomes real, and his Holy Spirit that is in me that allows me to believe that I can do all things through Christ that gives me strength. And so I pray that someone will be helped by sharing my story. I want to share that this was one of the gifts that Kevin gave to me on the weekend of his passing. That weekend was a real festive weekend. Jessica graduated from elementary school on Friday. And then on Saturday night, we went out with friends and took a horse and carriage ride down at the harbor and just shared some time with friends. He gifted me with these lilies. And the blessing of these lilies is they'll never grow old. They're silk and they'll always be around. So these lilies are over 20 years, they're 20 years plus now, all right? Because he gave them to me in June. And this, of course, is Kevin and our family, Kevin, Jessica, and I. And Kevin, full of life, full of activity, enjoyed doing things, and just being an all-around kind of good guy. And so I thank God that he blessed me with the experience to have him as my husband and for me to be his wife. And I'm just grateful that he's allowed me to see Jessica get to the age of an adulthood, and that I have a granddaughter as well, Lauren, and that God has blessed our life in the process of this experience.
Deaconess Clara, thank you for sharing, for being vulnerable, for sharing a part of your journey that will help others as they go through, as they grow through life circumstances. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about your journey. But Michelle, in hearing Deaconess Clara share her story, what comes to mind immediately just after watching that?
Oh my goodness. Strength. Just knowing that she had to be strong for her daughter, and that she is now the head of the house, and she had to be strong because now her covering was taken away from her. So now she has to be the strong one for her and her daughter. That's what I see.
Linda, what's your takeaway after watching?
I felt the same way, that she knew who her God was. So she knew that that's who she had to rely on to get her through it. And I love the process of her journaling, because sometimes when you're going through, I think that's just important for you to look at the good memories, the good times. And I'm sure that's what strengthened you and helped you a lot to get through the process, as well as, knowing that you had to take care of your daughter, but holding on to that little piece of you, a little piece of him, in your heart every day.
Deaconess Clara, let's start there. Let's start with journaling. There are a lot of different ways that people manage grief, manage challenges. Journaling is one that is often recommended as a positive and healthy way to manage our grief. Talk a little bit about the process, but the decision to also, I noticed you said you sealed it. Talk about the process, but the decision to seal it.
And so the process of journaling for me was to, again, get outside of me, the thoughts that I had, the feelings that I had, the need to just express what was inside. I wanted to share with Kevin about what was going on in our lives. The house went crazy. Everything broke in the house. The refrigerator went mad. The alarm system. It was everything that we would have laughed about together, maybe after it was done. But he had to know, or I had to share, this is what's going on. Can you really believe it? The other thing was journaling to God and sharing with him my hurt. In spite of the fact that I was going through it, it still hurt. And I still couldn't believe it. And so writing to Kevin, writing to God, and giving it all to the both of them in order to make myself whole, make myself complete. And not all the journaling was sad again. Some laughter, some experiences that we had together that I won't have with anyone else. I won't have that same experience with anyone else. The sealing of the journal, again, that's a chapter that has been completed, and a place that's private for me, and that I felt like it's time to close this up. It's time to close it. It's time to put some parameters around it. The grief will probably never completely go away, because there's always that part in your heart for that person that you love. However, the healing that God gives, the light when it comes back on, the just lifting one up, can allow that sad piece to be closed.
You talked about something that I also heard Miss Linda talk about, discipleship. You mentioned that you had graduated from discipleship a month or so prior to Kevin's passing. But discipleship gave you something. It gave you a foundation, it sounded like. Talk a little bit about the importance of that discipleship journey and what it prepared you for.
So I too was raised in the home of a Christian mom, and I accepted Christ when I was 13 years old. And so I knew who God was. However, discipleship grew my spiritual life, and it allowed me to apply God in a different way in my life than I had never done before, and to understand who God was more than ever before. And so that journey through discipleship just assured me of who God was and who I was to God, and the importance that I played in this whole universal situation, and that God had a plan for me, a plan to prosper me, not to harm me. And all of that word that we were given in discipleship, you know, it just, when you need it, it comes blossoming out. And it's there for you to reach into. So it gave me that foundation that I need to have a closer walk with the Lord, to understand who he was better, to understand myself better. And then it gave me sisters. My group was called Abundantly Blessed and Chosen. And my sisters embraced me when Kevin passed away, and they encouraged me. And so discipleship was a real experience. And I guess we all have put a plug in for it, but I'm gonna put another plug in for discipleship. You gotta do it, because it will change your life forever.
Yeah. You mentioned a particular part of your journey that I found very, very, very intriguing. You mentioned getting up in the morning before Jessica woke up to have your moment or to have your time. Why was that so important?
It was important because it was okay for her to see some of the process, but I didn't want her to see all of the pain that I was going through, because it was painful, and the pouring out that I needed to do in order to to get whole again. But there came a time when I had to be intentional about focusing on the positive, focusing on Kevin's life and not his death.
Sure.
And so through all of that process that I went through, the getting up, God allowed me to get to that point. He inspired me to not focus on the death, because that was just a small part of who Kevin was, and to focus on his life and the joy that we had together. And that strengthened me and allowed me to share with family and others, we're not going to just focus on his death. We're going to focus on his life. And that brought life to me.
An interesting trend between the three of you, as you shared your stories over these weeks, each of you talked about the significance of your daughter in the journey. And as I listened to your journey initially, and then to watch it again and reflect on each of you as moms who shared these incredible stories with your daughters, talk a little bit about that part of it, the mother-daughter relationship in the midst of not quitting. Michelle, I'll start with you, and then we'll work back to Deaconess Clara.
Well, I've always felt like it's me and Candace against the world from the beginning, because her father passed when she was in the hospital. So, which has made it seem like she's like another part of my body, literally. And I felt like I'm her protection. I'm all she has, even though she has our family, but I just always felt like she depends on me. So I've always, my life has changed because she has, everything I think about is surrounded about her. It's about Candace, you know, and I always wanted her to be proud of me because I was the only parent she had. So it's an incredible thing, and as you get older and you look back at all that, you know, you just hope that your child sees the sacrifice of everything, not just the sacrifice you've made, but the sacrifice of your feelings, the things that you've had for them so they don't hurt. I mean, it's so many things that you hope that they see that when they get older, and that they can pass down to their child, hopefully their daughter when they have daughters. But it has been a blessing to see them grow up and display some of the same things that you've done,
Yeah.
but not even speaking it, by just showing it to them.
Miss Linda, what about you?
The same thing, basically. I noticed all of our daughters were extremely young, and I
Yeah.
know that played a major part in it. My daughter was 12. So as I went through it, and the more we understood the whole concept, she actually does advocacy work herself as well.
Wow.
She, say her 16th birthday, she didn't accept any gifts. She had people to donate money to the cancer center.
Oh,
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so for a 16-year-old, that was big because they
Yeah.
always want things and stuff.
Yeah.
But she's kind of taken the same path. That's why I know it's important that kids watch everything that we do, and we have to be very mindful of that. But I don't want to forget, I do have a son. You know? And my son was more like my strength, I guess, because he was the oldest, and he was my rock. He was another one that was just at the hospital all the time, just
Yeah.
standing in the space, but trying to take care of my daughter to keep her here in a safety net as well, to make sure she was okay and making sure that I was provided for too. So it was just a good network.
Awesome.
But yeah.
Awesome. Deaconess Clara, you made a statement as you talked about you and Jessica. You said, I didn't want Kevin to pass and me to also die while I'm still here. Talk a little bit about that resilience to refuse to quit, refuse to give up in that space, and why that was so important for you and for Jessica.
You know, I think some people find it easier to check out. And I'm the product of a single mom household. She had 6 children, and she didn't check out, and she didn't let us check out. So I think I saw that growing up. I saw the strength in her, and that rolled over to me, and I was trying to roll it over to Jessica. It was difficult for Jessica and I at first. Difficult. She was a daddy's girl, and of course, I loved her too, but she was a daddy's girl. And I think that was real hard for her and painful, and it was difficult for her to show any kind of grief. As a result, I too sought counseling. And they talked about counseling. I sought counseling for Jessica, sought counseling for myself. And I think it was a bit more challenging for her to really express herself at 11 years old when it happened. But what did happen, which was instrumental, is she was involved in a girls group here at the church, Kariamu. And a conversation occurred during the group with another young lady who lost her father. And that was the beginning of her grieving process, where she was actually able to open up. She was able to express it through her tearing and able to cry it out and express the hurt that she felt, that her dad wouldn't be there to walk her down the aisle or see her with her first boyfriend, or what, you know, all the things, the first dance with her, all those things was able to come out of her. I think that also helped us bond more because there was an identity component there. I can identify with where you were, Mom, and your tearing and your sadness, but you had hope and you've been able to move past it, so I could move past it too. I think it's made us a stronger bond, stronger encouragers for one another. I see her strength. She's strong, she's resilient, and I'm proud of the woman that she has become and the mother that she is to her daughter.
Wow. You know, listening to all of these stories, over the weeks has provided tremendous encouragement. It's provided hope, I'm sure, for members of our congregation who have heard your stories. It has provided perspective that even as we go through, there's an opportunity for us to grow through. That God is giving us opportunities to grow. Perhaps it's our growth in our faith. Perhaps it's our growth in trusting Him. Perhaps it's even the ability to see ourselves as stronger than we ever knew we could be. And so I want to thank each of you for taking the time and allowing us a little bit of a peek into your journey. As you said, Deaconess Clara, that was one chapter. Michelle, you even alluded to it. There's more to the story. But as those chapters have come to an end, your past may be somebody else's present who's watching this. So it is our hope that as you have watched us these weeks, that you have found a source of encouragement, a source of hope, a glimmer of what your current situation could look like on the other side. None of our panelists have sugarcoated anything. None of them have glossed over the difficulty, the challenge, the struggle. But all of them have lifted up the hope, the faith, the trust, the belief, and the resilience it took for them to grow through life circumstances and not quit. Thank you for joining us. And whatever happens, don't quit.